in the land of the free, whether paper or plastic on cash or account, never pausing in our chase for the requisite amount. Each and every generation in a drive to excess, with some getting more and more getting less. A lifetime explosion of the loot in the bag. Humanity and culture worn down to a rag. Plastic in the air, in the water, in the sea. Plastic clothes for you, tons of plastic food for me. Plastic is the future, said the dad from the heights. And the irony has doubled, 'cause it seems that dad was right. The kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so let them march. The kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so hear them speak. The kids are alright, but trouble's brewing. The kids are alright, it's truth they seek. The kids are alright, except when they are not. When they're freezing with asthma or their world is too hot. When there's lead in their water and soot in the air. When there's nothing to do and nobody to care. When they're breathing in cancer and breathing out rage. When their American dream is just life in the cage. When rage coalesces on their own little spot, and they live broken-hearted or die of gunshot. The kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so let them march. The kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so hear them speak. The kids are alright, but trouble's brewing. The kids are alright, it's truth they seek. Carbon in the air, in the water, in the sea. Carbon pumped for you, tons of carbon spewed for me. Carbon is the future, said the dad from the heights. And the irony has doubled, 'cause it seems that dad was right. Kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so let them march. The kids are alright, it's their future. The kids are alright, so hear them speak. The kids are alright, but trouble's brewing. The kids are alright, it's truth they speak.
Welcome everyone to the Earth Day South Carolina webinar. Today is the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day back in 1970, and the urgency of both celebrating and protecting the Earth has only grown over 5 decades. Tonight, we are all concerned about the state of our environment in the face of the worldwide pandemic. My name is Amy Brooks, and I am with Green Faith, a global multi-faith environmental and climate justice network. My co-host is Emma Silvas-Berry, a student at the University of South Carolina and a member of the Sierra Student Coalition. We are grateful to be here with you this evening.
Thank you, Amy. Tonight, we have 3 very special guests. Jim Gandy, former chief meteorologist for WLTX Columbia, noted public speaker and gardener. Dr. Kirsten Dow, Carolina Trustees Professor in the University of South Carolina Department of Geography and Principal Investigator at the Carolinas Integrated Sciences and Assessment, CISA, bringing together climate science and practical policy in the Carolinas. Reverend Leo Woodbury, a pastor of Kingdom Living Temple in Florence, South Carolina, and executive director of the New Alpha Community Development Corporation.
We are grateful to have our distinguished panelists with us tonight, but we are also grateful to have all of you here with us. And we'll be hearing from you, our listeners, later this evening with a question and answer session following the panelists' presentations. What do you want to know about climate change in the world or here in South Carolina? What can you do to make a difference? Registered participants on the call can submit their questions using the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time we have. You can find the Q&A function on your toolbar at the bottom of your screen. The icon looks like a double speech bubble. Our first speaker tonight is Jim Gandy. Jim is a well-known meteorologist with more than 20 years in broadcasting here in Columbia. His pioneering work on climate change won him a large following and numerous awards. Most recently, the 2019 Palmetto Award for his distinguished years of service in South Carolina. He has also become very well known for his Gandy's Garden segment, and today he will be speaking on food security. Jim, thanks for being with us.
There you go. All right. Well, let's get started then. This is Earth Day, and welcome everyone. Despite all the technical difficulties that we seem to be having at the moment, I think this will work out just fine. My talk tonight is about climate change and food security, and that is becoming an increasing topic at this time. The Earth is warming, and it's due to the emission of heat-trapping pollution in the atmosphere. The warming is on a scale that has rarely been seen on this planet. In fact, on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day, the average temperature has warmed 2.8 degrees here in Columbia, and that's just since the first Earth Day just 50 years ago. And I'll show you what that looks like right now. You can see back in 1970, there's been a lot, since then, there's been a lot of variability in the temperature each year, but the trend is unmistakable, and it's going to continue. Now, one of the disturbing aspects of climate change is the impact on what we eat. Farmers choose crops that are well suited for the local conditions. However, with changing weather and climate conditions, that's becoming increasingly more difficult. The warming has allowed new pests, pathogens, and weeds to become a real problem for the farming community. The changing conditions has also caused floods and droughts to increase in frequency and in intensity. The problem with floods and droughts is that they can occur at the same time. Now that sounds strange, but it is well known that in the atmosphere, as it warms, the amount of water vapor increases. Now, for a lot of people, that thinks, well, that just means we're going to get more rain. But a closer examination shows a different picture. Now, while the incidence of extreme rainfall is increasing, research shows that the amount of light to moderate rainfall is decreasing. Also, the period of time between rainfall is increasing. So while you may get heavy rain, there'll be periods of rainfall or lack of rainfall in between the rain events. So while you get more heavy rain events, the annual precipitation actually can decrease. And that's something that we're actually observing here in South Carolina. Now, heavy rain washes away topsoil and nutrients, but then the farmer faces the possibility of a short-term drought before the next rain. Now, this puts stress on crops and can lower the crop yields. Heavy use of fertilizers can worsen water quality in the runoff to streams and rivers. Now, current agricultural practices are degrading the soil and are not sustainable. Right now, agriculture is responsible for about 9% of the carbon dioxide that gets into the atmosphere. Farm practices like planting a cover crop Applying compost, reduced tilling can increase soil carbon, thereby reducing the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. The use of organic fertilizers rather than synthetic fertilizers increases carbon in the soil as well. The sustainability of agriculture is vitally important, but there can also be disruptions in the food supply that can cause problems. The most recent example of that is the current pandemic. You've probably noticed the difficulty that grocery stores are having in keeping products on the shelves, and this is true for meat and vegetables. Climate change can cause disruptions in the food supply as well. California is now in a mega drought, which began in 2000. Recently published research shows that the period from the year 2000 to 2018 was the second driest 19-year period in the last 1,200 years. It is largely a natural event, but it has been determined that human-caused climate change made it worse. So here you have a moderate drought becoming more severe because of the man-made climate change. Now, I first recognized this problem back in 2014, and let me just show you something very quickly, if I can bring it up on my screen here. This graphic is pretty telling. This was tweeted by Heidi Cullen, a scientist at Climate Central at the time, showing how much we depend on California for vegetables. It turns out that California supplies almost 50% of the nation's commercially produced vegetables. Now, I knew this when she tweeted this out, and I knew that in 2014, California was headed for a serious drought. They were already in one, and it was not going to be a good year. I also realized that this was going to cause vegetable prices to increase. So I convinced WLTX that we needed to start a garden to show people how to grow their own vegetables. We partnered with the Clemson Extension Service, who provided much needed expertise, and thus Gandy's Garden was born. It was an instant success. And even though I am retired now, it still continues under the direction of Alex Calamia, the morning meteorologist. Now, something unexpected happened in the garden. I began to see the impact of climate change. The warming of the climate could be seen locally, especially at night. In turn, this was affecting some production of vegetables. Now, in particular, the heat of summer was troublesome for tomatoes. The July heat was causing the pollen to become sterile to the point that the plants could not bear fruit. What was happening in the garden was also happening on the farm. And farmers in the low country of South Carolina have had to use new planting strategies to adapt to the changing climate. Now, if you'll remember from your history, victory gardens were encouraged during World War I and World War II, and they were there to supplement rations of food. Many of your grandparents had gardens at home. Well, maybe it's time to bring the idea of victory gardens back. Climate change, as well as pandemics, can disrupt the distribution and the availability of food. We are fortunate in South Carolina that we can grow vegetables year-round. The Victory Garden is not only a chance to supplement rations of food, but to ensure that food is on the table. It can also address climate change by reducing your carbon footprint. Please stand by. As we say in television, please do not adjust your TV sets.
Hello. Can everyone hear me? Give me a
I can
thumbs
hear
up.
you.
Got a thumbs up from anybody? Great.
Yes, I am suddenly able to speak again.
Great.
Okay,
I would just love to give an introduction to Dr. Kirsten Dow. Thank you, Mr. Gandy. That was amazing. So Dr. Kirsten Dow, in addition to her work at the University of South Carolina as a social environmental geographer focusing on understanding climate impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation, she is principal investigator of the Carolinas Integrated Sciences and Assessment, integrating climate information into water, health, and coastal management. Dr. Dow is also a member of NOAA's Science Advisory Board, Climate Working Group, and a lead author on the Southeast chapter for the 4th U.S. National Climate Assessment in 2018. She has previously served as a lead author on the International Panel on Climate Change 5th Assessment Report. And if that weren't enough, she has published numerous scientific papers, plus the seminal book, The Atlas of Climate Change. Her topic this evening is serious, scary, and stoppable. Dr. Dow, we can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Can you see my screen? Happy Earth Day. Yes? We're on Happy Earth Day. Well, Happy Earth Day, everyone. Round of applause for everybody. It's great to be here with you. This is such a wonderful, important day and meaningful in that we look at what was going on 50 years ago with the first Clean Air Act, where the pollutants they described didn't include carbon dioxide. Yet here we should remember at this moment the enormous progress that has been made. There's a lot left to do with waters, with air. We've made enormous progress. And so on this Earth Day, we need to have that faith that it's possible to make the progress because we have some work to do. We have some serious work to do. So as my dear colleague Jim Candy pointed out, we're in a situation where we know that the temperatures are rising. 2019 itself was the second warmest temperature worldwide. In these dark red colors, you can see the record warmest temperatures. And we know that in Australia, those record warmest temperatures were part of the wildfires that consumed that country and caused just heartbreaking devastation. And it's not just Australia. The map here shows various symbols for scientific studies that have attributed impacts in different parts of the world to climate changes, everything from drought to extreme rainfall to temperature to storms. It's happening everywhere. It's very clear. It's no doubt that, why shouldn't the word of the year be climate emergency? Because that's where we are. The good news is, though, and the news that we need to focus on, and I think what we need to take into the coming year is not that it's happening, but that we can do something about it. We have lots of strategies. I love wedge diagrams because they show how we can put it all together. It's not all about what you can do yourself because that's just too much. It's how we can be together in this, like we're together in so many other things right now, right? At the federal level, looking for fuel economy standards in the national fleet, in the state, in our energy code, in our personal lives, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, right? Those of us, many of us haven't been putting in too many VMTs lately, right? Here we are. But all these pieces add up to a story of the reductions that we need to avoid the worst consequences that are projected by science. We're going to see some, but the worst is avoidable, and that's what we need to look at. And so let's be some superheroes, right? Think about avoiding a metric ton of carbon dioxide. You may have already burned 100 gallons less gasoline than you would usually, but if you're looking for other tips, inflate your car tires. It's my favorite. It's cheap. It's one of the most environmentally effective things you can do to reduce the amount of gasoline you use. We can save kilowatt energy in our homes. We know lots about that. We could fly fewer miles. That's happening too, right? It's not ideal the way that's happening. It's far from ideal how that's happening, but it's happening. Or we can drive fewer miles. And so we put it all together. But I wanted to individual actions and blend it together with what all of us can do. This is a call center. I thought it was a great image for this. If your workplace were to shut off each of these computers, I don't know who wants to do a quick count of those for me. Raise your hand if you can count them for me before I finish this slide. If you were to shut off all those computers, the copiers, the fax machines, the lights, the conference rooms, the video displays in the upper corners, we could make a much stronger collective impact. Imagine doing that not just every night, but over the weekend, 48 hours plus. We can do this and we can do more. It's that collective action and thinking creatively, as we've been having to do in these last few weeks. That kind of creativity is needed for this issue as well. Another thing a workplace can do that's really effective to bring out a local story is to build and buy green. Buy things that have low energy impact. This is a sketch of the University of South Carolina's West Quad. It's a green building. When that building went out for bid by different contractors in South Carolina, there were no people certified in green building in South Carolina. But the bid said, we prefer to partner with people who have experience in green building. And lo and behold, partners who were interested in this bid went out and they learned about green building and they partnered with people who have that experience. And now we have a vibrant building community. We see that from buildings all over the University of South Carolina, all over the city. The small actions can incentivize enormous changes, and looking for those leverage points is a great thing that we should be thinking about in the coming year. We can also look to encourage our city to do some things. This is this issue of tree canopy is a particular concern of mine. When our city was redoing its comprehensive plans, the issue of improving the urban tree canopy didn't make it into the comprehensive plan. We still have a tree beautification committee, but this is Atlanta with a nice image showing the temperature, right? Those reds, those whites, 100, 110, 110 plus degrees. Those are the buildings, and the cool blue, green, yellows here are where there's adequate tree cover. And this can be done. We know things grow like crazy here in South Carolina. We have space, we have opportunities. We need to make it a larger priority to do that, to make our city itself more livable, because the scenarios that we have in front of us include things like another 30 days of temperatures above 95 degrees by 2050, which is really just around the corner. So we need to support these strategically. I'd also like to suggest that while we're thinking about collective action, let's push at the state level. It's we're not the Sunshine State, but we're just a little bit north of the Sunshine State, right? And we know that we've had some spectacular days, and we've got plenty of sunshine, even if we didn't put it on our license plate, right? So supporting the investment in renewable energy resources here in South Carolina would be wonderful. We do have some good incentive programs out there through the utilities, through the federal government, through state government, but our state opportunities are capped for something called net metering. Your ability to sell your solar energy back to the utility is capped at 2% of the peak levels. And that could be expanded. So it could be a larger percentage of our overall energy portfolio within the state. And think about that. And I also want to just say that it's important to think about how to do this, not just for homeowners, but for landlords, and to make this accessible and these things available to renters. People in South Carolina are in a variety of different situations with their housing, and there are benefits to be had for everyone if we think about it strategically and recognize those opportunities so that the benefits are accessible. You know, we talk about solar. I suggest doing solar. I suggest solar residential, but I know that it could be a $10,000 upfront cost, and that's not there for everyone. So how do we get beyond that and make it more available to everyone? And finally, I want y'all use your superpower, right? Get out there. It's this is a year, 2020, a key year for voting, and making sure that you're supporting candidates and pushing them to clarify their plans about making science-based commitments, not just waving their hands at science-based commitments, but being specific that they know the science and they're willing to make those commitments to reduce the emissions and to invest in resilience. Our state has suffered a number of terrible disasters recently, and we are going to continue to experience some climate change, but we can become more resilient and avoid the worst impacts by investing. So I encourage you to work together in so many ways and take that to the voting booth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dow. That is really important information to us for us to have about the impacts of climate change, and also some wonderful suggestions about how we could be making a difference. If you have questions for Dr. Dow or any of our other panelists, please put them in the Q&A function that you will find hopefully at the bottom of your screen. And now it is my honor to introduce our final speaker tonight, the Reverend Leah Woodbury. As Emma mentioned earlier, Reverend Woodbury is pastor of Kingdom Living Temple in Florence, South Carolina, but that is not the only hat he wears. He also serves as executive director of the nonprofit New Alpha Community Development Corporation and as the environmental justice chair of the Sierra Club's Ready for 100 campaign, as well as my organization, Green Faiths, as a board member. Reverend Woodbury also has a long history of working on the front lines with the Black church and among other disenfranchised communities, many of which feel the impact of climate change first and hardest. He will be sharing his thoughts this evening on COVID, climate crises, and solutions. Welcome, Reverend Woodbury.
Thank you so much, Amy, and happy Earth Day to everyone. During the time, we're really happy that, we're celebrating the 50th year of Earth Day. However, we find ourselves in a very troubling and perplexing situation. And I'd like to start off by talking about how did we get where we are? And not only as a minister, but as a human being, we have to realize that we got in this situation because we were not considering the impacts, not on our planet at first, but the impacts on marginalized communities, people of color communities, poor white communities. We were not concerned about where the polluting facilities were sited. And we did not realize that that pollution would be stationary, but however the wind blows and waters flow. And eventually other areas became polluted, mercury in our waterways, et cetera, until finally climate change took place. And so when we look at what we need to do, and my two colleagues did an admirable job of talking about what we can do individually, and truly the change begins with each and every one of us. So we also have to look at macro solutions. So we have to look at the fact that we have to stop using fossil fuels. We have to stop citing them in marginalized communities. We have to realize that all these things are intersectional. And so when we look at the disruption and destruction of creation, we realize that as the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and National Climate Assessment Report said, that not only would we have more hurricanes, more tornadoes, et cetera, but we also would see diseases such as tropical diseases that we've never seen before. And the imbalance that is occurring with our ecosystem is causing us to see things like SARS, MERS, and right now, COVID-19. And so a lot of the problems are dealing with our entire structure, our entire system. So right now, close to 50% of the people who are contracting the coronavirus and becoming fatalities, almost 50% of them are African Americans and people of color. And a lot of that comes from the fact that, as Jim said, we're not planting gardens. So a lot of people live in food deserts and food swamps, and they have diabetes, they have respiratory problems because they live near interstate highways. 78% African Americans live within 30 miles of a polluting facility or interstate highway. And so they're breathing bad air. People are also, because they live in food deserts and food swamps, have a disparity in terms of health when it comes to diabetes and it comes to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. And we know those are the things that make people most susceptible right now to the coronavirus. And so the solutions that we have to put in place are multi-pronged. We have to stop using fossil fuels. We have to stop citing them in the communities where the most harm can be done. And then the other thing that we have to do is we have to start looking at community-led climate solutions, because communities know what they need. Communities know what the answers are. And so when you take some of the communities as Nichols, South Carolina, Britain's Neck, South Carolina, Sellers, South Carolina, that have been impacted 3 times severely with floods due to climate impacts, when you go to those communities, the people will tell you the flooding is worse because we have large-scale logging and the trees are gone. The people will tell you that we have a river that needs to be dredged out because it hasn't been dredged out. The little PD River overflows onto land and into people's homes rather than feeding into the big PD River. And so we need to look at the people who are impacted by climate change and who are bearing the greatest brunt of the coronavirus now, but also the viruses, the diseases that are to come. Because when we think about intersectionality, we have to realize that we are not separate from one another. We also have to realize that we are not apart from nature, but we are connected to nature. And so it also means that we have to begin a change that begins with us, that we have to change our lifestyles. We have to change how we eat. We have to change how we interact with each other. We have to change how we generate our energy. And we have to realize that if we don't care for the least among us, that eventually it will come to our communities, it will come to our homes, it will come to our world. And so we know what we've been facing. We know that we've been warned by scientists about what is to come. And so we need to really bear down and make the changes. That includes policy changes so that we develop a renewable portfolio so that we can have more renewable energy in our state. So I'm going to close there so that we can have time for questions because we started a little late. But we just need to realize that this situation that we're going through, COVID-19, is showing us the cracks in our systems. It's showing us the inequities that we are living with. And we have an opportunity, while we're talking about creating a new normal, of creating a world that is better, that is cleaner, that is nourishing, where all of us can have a right to clean air, clean land, and clean water, and a world where we have much more peace, much more joy, instead of the terror, the fear, and the sorrow that's engulfing South Carolina and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Reverend. Your presentation on environmental justice was truly enlightening. And thank you also to all of our speakers. At this time, as Reverend said, we're going to transition to the question and answer section so we can hear from all of you, our listeners. If you have a question, please enter it using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Click on the icon and type in your question. We'll take as many questions as we have time for. I believe Amy has one from the question section all ready to go.
Yes, thank you, Emma, I do. One person asked a question that she directed to Dr. Dow, and this person was wondering if there are carbon-based policies to help us make this transition in the face of climate change that we could be working towards. Are there any policies or legislation that would help us reduce carbon that you can recommend for people to look out for? And I know Reverend Leo Woodbury may also have some information about that.
Well, let me start with one that hits on some politics. transportation accounts for a good 20 to 30% of carbon emissions. It's a major area where we could make significant progress. And in the United States, personal vehicles are an important part of that. Under the previous administration, the EPA had been created a new standard for they call it the CAFE standards, the corporate automotive fleet average, but it's at what is the average fuel efficiency of the cars that are being produced in America? And that is being pulled back under current administration. I believe that we could push for it to be reenacted as we move forward. It's a particularly hard loss because of the significance of it in the American lifestyle. And Reverend Woodbury, please.
Yes, definitely we're facing a lot of rollbacks right now, but there are also a lot of efforts going on throughout the country to enact something like a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is a concept, but we have people who are actually going into communities. We're working with several organizations now. Dogwood Alliance is looking at it from a forest perspective. And we have 5 other organizations in the South, including South Carolina, that is currently doing an assessment of what people needs are and what challenges they are facing so that we can put together an assessment and recommendations as to policy changes. So that's really important because one size will not fit all. So while you have sea level rise in Charleston and Louisiana, you have a completely different situation in Louisville, Kentucky. And so we're working on some things right now. We're dealing with the political situation in states and in Congress where a lot of legislation is difficult to pass it, but we need to be ready so that when we have that political sea change, we'll have policies already in place or ideas so that we can make the very quick and necessary strides that are necessary to make the changes that we need. Scientists have told us we have roughly 10 years to cut our carbon emissions, and otherwise we will not be able to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis.
Thank you both for your helpful answers to that question. I think we're going to transition to a new question, and it's aimed towards Mr. Gandy. So we had one attendee asking about if there are any agencies that would be helpful in starting a victory garden. And then we actually had a different attendee answer that a little bit and kind of ask another question off of it. Deborah Billings said, here in Midlands, we started Mutual Aid Midlands Initiative. Supporting people to grow gardens is one of the priorities that they have. And then she asked, Mr. Gandy, what suggestions do you have for people who don't have much land or live in apartments? What can they grow and how?
Okay, well, let me answer both of those questions because there are different answers. First of all, of course, when we started Gandy's Garden, we used the Clemson Extension service. Now, keep in mind, they're the ones who are running the county agents. And in Richland County, that's Jackie Jordan. And she gave us a lot of good advice, and she still does to these days. But you have to understand that the Clemson Extension Service, still most of their focus is on the farms, and rightly so. But they do provide some expertise for the typical gardener. There are a lot of garden clubs around the Columbia area, and I know throughout the Midlands, and they can be very helpful. But to help those that aren't part of those garden clubs, Alex at WLTX started a Facebook group just 2 days ago, and it's called Gandy's Gardeners. And he's honored by letting me help him answer some of those questions, which are already starting to come in. It's called Gandy's Gardeners. And so there's a Facebook source where if you've got a question, we'll see if we can get the answer for you. The other question relating to, okay, what if you don't have a backyard that you can do a garden? As it turns out, Alex grew up in New York City and didn't have a backyard. And so his early experience at gardening was on a balcony. So it's a container type of garden that you can produce from that. He's very good at it. He's already shown examples on the air, and we'll continue to do that when we migrate to the Facebook group as well. So if you want some information that's just, geared toward the backyard garden or to a container garden, that's where you can go.
Great. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Gardening is really important for food security. Our next question is probably directed again to Dr. Dow. And the question is, how can we encourage USC, University of South Carolina, to be more active in fighting and conducting research on climate change?
Who's that directed to?
That is directed to Dr. Dow. I'm sorry.
Brief delay. Thank you. I think that there's a good bit going on at the University of South Carolina. We do have an Office of Sustainability, and there are a number of initiatives there. And we have a terrific student body, some of whom are here, who are committed to addressing the sustainability issues. I believe that continuing, as I said, to tell people in positions of authority that this is a priority that should be addressed is an important step. There are, of course, we're in a situation where we're going to be putting other competing priorities, but the continued focus and attention to sustainability would be a positive step. We could also look towards, it's hard to talk about anything during this budget crisis that talks about expanding the capacity of faculty, but we could certainly do more in bringing in faculty who have expertise around climate change. Not that we don't have a good number, but it's a huge multidimensional problem that covers everything from public health to social work to engineering to communications, and there's full opportunity to build that expertise. And if that's a priority for the state, we are the state's flagship university. I believe people should hear that.
I totally, as a student at USC, definitely know how great the Office of Sustainability is right now. And something that they always talk about is how they just need students to say what they, are passionate about, and if they care about the environment. And if you are a student at the University of South Carolina, for sure get involved in a different, there are tons of student environmental groups on campus, and you can always, participate in events like this and at an advocacy. So that's definitely just get involved and make your voice heard. I think we're going to transition to a new question now.
Emma, there's also a survey out asking for student opinions. Sustainability should be focused on. So if you're a student, you're interested, and you haven't received that survey, you can email me, or you can look at the Office of Sustainability to find a connection there. But
Yes.
It's a different way of voting. I'm all about voting. Vote.
I think that's a perfect take-home message. So next we're going to ask, I know Reverend Woodbury, you had talked about this a little bit, and the rest of our panelists can definitely answer this as well. But is action right now more important? Can you see a lot of things actually feasibly taking place on the more so community level for advocacy, or should we be aiming for more so large scale change?
Well, thank you for that question. That's one that's been pondered and discussed by many people. And we have to work both on the macro level in terms of policy, but also on the community level, because if we can do enough on the micro level, the aggregate, effects will be just as good as what might happen on a larger scale. But we are seeing some things. So, for example, Dr. Gandy talked about, what happens when people don't have land to grow. Well, in Florence, this week we'll be tilling up the soil at a church where 3 churches have come together in order to grow vegetables. And some of those vegetables will be going to a homeless shelter. Some will be going to a program that feeds about 200 people weekly. And hopefully the rest will be available for the community. So that's a small scale solution, but it's a much larger piece of land than the typical small community gardens that you see. Then also people are talking about other things. So in Marion County, there's some conversation because people have been evacuated 3 times since 2015. And they're talking about how they can protect their wetlands, how they can expand it, how they can plant more trees, but not just any type of trees, trees that fit in with the ecosystem, trees that bear fruit, nut trees, so that we're also creating engines of economic development in impoverished areas. So while we're waiting for the policymakers to catch up or to detach themselves from the lobbyists who are giving them very lucrative campaign contributions, we need to move forward because we have, I believe, less than 10 years, because since the IPCC report, the National Climate Assessment Report came out saying we had 10 years. That was before the Australian fires. That was before the fires in California. That was before the fires in the rainforest in the Amazon in Brazil. So definitely we need to do as much as we can as individuals and communities while we're pushing for policy and systemic change.
Thank you, Reverend Woodbury, and thank you to all our panelists. I'm afraid we're about out of time for our questions this evening. This has been a rich conversation, and I thank all of you for your amazing questions. I think it's been challenging to hear about the ways in which climate change has affected and will continue to affect the Earth and our daily lives. And it has also been hopeful to hear things that we might do to mitigate this challenge and begin to take action, whether it's gardening or pushing for legislation. And I want to turn our attention in this direction because, as we have heard tonight in different ways, climate change is a problem that none of us can solve alone. I work at Green Faith, and we are thinking very deeply about how COVID-19 can teach us to address this current situation, while also preparing for a future in the midst of climate crises. And that is why we are inviting people to learn how to create what we're calling circles of care and resilience, small groups of neighbors or people in your faith community, learning how to rely on each other and to create change, now and for the future. For those of us who are people of faith, we know that we need to deepen our faith and build our resolve and to support each other to make lasting personal changes, as well as to engage our faith communities, our businesses, and our governments to use their resources more wisely and more equitably. As people of faith, we have deep wells of wisdom to respond to these challenges, and we have a history of turning towards social problems with courage. Now is the time for all of us to reach out to the many organizations on the ground, the ones that are represented here tonight, but so many others in your community, wherever you are, in South Carolina or beyond, people who are already working on this issue, and to bring our wisdom and our energy and our resources to the table. Now is the time to engage. Now is the time to organize.
That's right, Amy. After all, this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And tonight, Earth Day South Carolina is not alone. We are one of thousands of virtual events commemorating that anniversary, all around our beautiful, fragile world. Millions are learning, acting, speaking up, and, most importantly, organizing to be the strong voice of this planet.
Yes, our webinar is a registered event under the U.S. Climate Strikes, a broad coalition of youth and adult organizations, from Fridays for the Future to Sierra Club to the Hip Hop Caucus and beyond. In addition to local and regional online events like this one, there is an ongoing global live stream, which is viewable at www.earthdaylive2020.org.
The global live stream is actually a 3-day event. Today, the focus is on Earth Day and our community.
And featuring some outstanding headliners, including musicians, speakers, and celebrities.
Yes, you'd expect Bill McKibben of 350.org and maybe William Barber II of Poor People's Campaign. Both have been such elegant speakers against what Reverend Barber calls ecological devastation. But you might not expect Amy Mann or Moby, Luke Barnes, Rosanna, or Patricia Arquette, or Jason Mraz.
We clearly are not alone in our concern for the planet. As you said, the live stream does not stop today. Green Faith kicks off tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. as the focus moves to divestment from fossil fuels and resetting the global economy to work for people, not polluters. Friday will be centered on political reality, helping us feel the urgency of this historic moment and encouraging us to vote our environmental values.
And not least my generation, which will be living the reality of climate change for the rest of our lives. In the US, Friday will be a nationwide youth voter registration day.
So that's the big picture. But right now we want to focus on you, our listeners, and on your ideas for climate action. We would like to invite everybody who's on this call to share a climate or environment preserving action that you have been taking or plan to take. What are you doing now? What do you plan to do? Please share with us in the chat or via comment stream on Facebook Live.
And when you finish sharing, hang around to take inspiration from what other folks are doing, because we'll highlight a few of the actions that happen to catch our eye. Or you may find inspiration in the collection of links we're about to roll for you. Feel free to take a photo of the links. There are climate-focused organizations on that list that could surely use your help.
I see people are beginning to.
For sure, there's one attendee wrote, "Plant more trees."
I've heard a lot of people are planting trees today. I think that's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Work with other parents to ensure my kids' school goes to renewable energy. Yes, that sounds great. Dr. Dow's consulting on a new atlas of climate change for young people. Look for it later this year. That sounds great.
Ooh, we even have attendees writing music songs about climate change. I love that collaboration.
If you're looking for ideas, I encourage you to pay attention at the end of our time together. We're going to have a lot of information there that you can write down. Oh, here's another one. Okay, someone got a live tree for Christmas and they planted it and they're going to make it a tradition. That's wonderful.
Oh, I love Carly talked about helping your school commit to 100% clean energy for the future. I know that's something that our USC Sierra Club has been working on. They got a resolution passed in the Student Government Senate, so that's exciting.
Someone volunteers with Trees Upstate planting and also works with Conservation VIP for projects in Peru and Costa Rica. And he's going to go plant trees in Patagonia next February.
That sounds like something I need to start doing.
You know, right? I always have to say, for me as a parent, I'm always trying to encourage my child to really think seriously about whether she needs to buy the next plastic thing. We really have an ongoing conversation here at home about that. It's a struggle.
Of course, there's always aim to recycle more as well. I know sometimes it's hard because they change a lot of the times what is recyclable, but it's definitely good to look it up and stay on top of that. Well, it's been great to hear some of the fabulous things that people are doing. There's always a lot happening that we ordinarily wouldn't get to hear about.
Yes, and I think it's really easy to get discouraged, especially during this time of isolation. We may be unaware of the work that's actually being accomplished all around us. So thank you to everyone who shared some of the work that they are doing with us here tonight.
If you would like to find more information about tonight's webinar and speakers, go to earthdaysc.org. We would also like to thank some of our supporting organizations: Columbia Resilience, Columbia Friends Meeting, Conservation Voters of South Carolina, Green Faith Columbia SC Circle, SC Native Plant Society, South Carolina Chapter of Elders Climate Action, South Carolina Sierra Club Midlands Group, the Sierra Club Student Coalition, and the Climate Reality Project, Greater Columbia Area SC Chapter. Thank you all for your support. Without it, this webinar would not have been possible. Please stay in touch. We at Earth Day South Carolina will be working for a livable climate.
Let's close this evening with Meira Warshower's song of love for and from nature, Ahava. Some of us may have already heard it at the end of our pre-show today, but this time, let's hear from Dr. Warshower herself as she tells the story of the creation of this brief but beautiful work.
Many years ago, in the summer of 1991, I was at a Jewish retreat on the campus of Bryn Mawr College. One day, after saying my afternoon prayers overlooking a meadow, I turned around and beheld a magnificent beech tree. Drawn to approach her, I embraced her wide trunk and gazed up into her branches. To my surprise, a question emerged from inside me. Do you have a song for me? To my delight and wonder, I heard a beautiful, simple chant on the Hebrew word for love, Ahava. It was as if the tree were emanating love to me and to all of humanity. And later I realized it was from all the trees and all of creation singing love. Can we return this love and heal our suffering earth home? Please join in chanting Ahava along with this video of photographs from that very same beech tree taken last year in early spring.
just these eyes to see. Wanting plays the bloodstream, whispers pull the ear, echoes reveal desire. Just this heart, just this heart, just this heart.